story on the 14 centuries of war between Islam and the West. Now, it's really critical for people to understand that if you do not follow the history of what's been going on for 14 centuries, there's nothing new under the sun. But there's a reapplication, and interestingly enough, I remember 20 years ago, and Raymond's on so he can hear my voice, right, Raymond? Can Raymond hear me?
Yeah.
Raymond? He's on. I think he is. Raymond. Mr. Ibrahim.
Yeah, hi.
There we go.
I didn't hear anything until once Steve was introduced. I didn't hear anything.
Okay.
And Doug, can you give me a little more volume, or Todd, on Raymond? I don't know if he's on Skype. Yeah. I'm not hearing him very clearly. Let me start off by saying this. When you look at war, you look at so many dimensions, but when you're talking about the war in the Middle East, and when you're talking about the biblical narrative, and you're talking about the future prophetic ramifications, there seems to be this, what I would call, divorce from reality in Western thought and teaching as to the entire nature of the difference between what Christendom has accomplished versus what Islam has destroyed. Now, it's important for people to understand Raymond Ibrahim is one of the world scholars on this, and obviously he's a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, but he came out of a Islamic background. So, Raymond, in order for us to set the stage, I want you to establish your credentials and just discuss your background in the field, because again, when you're talking about war between Western powers and Eastern powers in the history of World War I, World War II, and soon to be World War III and the Cold War, etc., that's set in a context of Western thought. But please develop for the listeners, if you would, to get a grasp on how Middle Easterners, especially the Muslims, look at the world. Because again, everybody's trying to say this is just, these poor misunderstood Middle Easterners. So take your liberties, sir. And when you're done, you can hand it over to me for a break. But people want to hear you tonight. So, tell people who you are. And you're a great researcher, an author of the new book, Sword and Scimitar, which, by the way, I'm a sword guy, so I love your cover, and I love swords. So go ahead, sir.
Okay, Steve. And first of all, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me. And, just one correction. I'm actually, my background is Coptic Christian from Egypt. So I was never Muslim, or my family was never Muslim, though, of course, we have a lot of experience with them. So we're, the word Coptic essentially means...
I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. That's a lot of people assume that. So that's fine, but just for the record. Having said all that, of course, as you say, a lot of my worldview and my understanding of the world, both on a personal experience level and a professional academic level, has very much informed and governed my view on Islam, especially vis-a-vis the West, or Christendom, really, as you were saying. And so there's a lot that we're going to be talking about, obviously. And ultimately what we're talking about and what we want to do is we want to learn about today and what's going on. But as you sort of alluded, it's impossible to understand that without getting the historical context. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book is because whenever so many people here in the West assume that they have this kind of vague, nebulous idea about what went on historically between the West and the Islamic world. And I'm here to tell you that assumption, that very mainstream assumption, is not just wrong, it's the antithesis of reality. This idea that Muslims were, tolerant and they spread out, and, Christians were backwards and wild and fanatical, the sort of thing that we see in all these movies, Kingdom of Heaven and so forth. We can go down a list of movies that depict it this way. But it's not just movies, it's actual well-credentialed, well-respected academics that engage in this sort of chicanery regularly. So much so that the epistemology, Western epistemology, insofar as history goes, is so skewed. And, it's impossible to start understanding where we are today, to understand, phenomena like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda or all these different groups, or just the Muslim migrant wave in Europe and what's going on there and so forth. So definitely I want to talk about the history, but insofar as just to give listeners a little bit of my background. So as I was saying, my family, I was born here actually in the United States, but my parents came here from Egypt, and they're what's called Coptic Christians. Basically, the word Coptic is related to etymologically to the word Egyptian. And today, when you hear it, Copt, most people who know the word, I mean, usually if I say I'm a Copt, people ask me what precinct I work at, and I have to elaborate. But usually, for people who understand what the word means, it's synonymous with Christian, okay? But really, if you look at the word Egypt and Egyptian, it comes from the Greek word Aegyptos. And so when the Arabs overran Egypt, which was full of Egyptians or Aegyptos, they cut off the first and last syllables and they were left with Gipt. And that became Copt in English transliteration. So all the word Copt means is really a native Egyptian who of course, were all Christian when the Muslims came. So that's my background, my family background. And my family actually left Egypt, and it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it is now. But the discrimination was definitely well entrenched. When it comes to things like jobs and schools and so forth. And that was one of the reasons that my father and mother left, and I'm glad they did. So I was born here, but because of that sort of background, I grew up in that sort of household, and I understood the nature of the beast, as it were. And then when I got older, in college, I studied the history. My degrees are in history, bachelor's and master's, and I almost got a PhD, but the exigencies of life, writing books, full-time work, family, and so forth, I never finished it. But when I was when the 9/11 attacks happened, for example, I was writing my thesis. This is actually, I started it before 2001. So in the late 90s, I was actually studying the history of Islam vis-a-vis Christendom in their very first battle. And as you can see, this segues to my book, because that's how long I've been writing this book, sometimes in my head. But that's been my interest, the battle, the military history. And that battle occurred in 636 AD, and I wrote my master's thesis on it. And actually, my chairman was Victor Davis Hanson, basically America's premier military historian, who also wrote a foreword to Sword and Scimitar. So that's all good stuff. But what I wrote when I wrote that thesis, what I noticed is I was just immersed in history. I didn't really follow much contemporary affairs. And, I read the historical texts and the primary sources and the languages and so forth. And then what got me is when 9/11 happened, and I started reading in Arabic, because it wasn't available in English, what Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri were saying. Everything they were saying was actually a repeat of history. And they were intentionally cultivating their words in verbatim of the heroes of Islam from the 636 battle that I was talking about. And very few people understood that. I mean, it just went over their heads. But in writing to fellow Muslims, they articulated it in the verbatim words. They positioned themselves as following in the footsteps of the original jihadis from the 7th century who invaded, the world, and that sort of thing. And long story short, because of my interest in what was happening in the now and in the past, I went to Washington, D.C. I got accepted in Georgetown University. I was going to get another master's degree, and that's also where I started my PhD. But and that's a whole other topic. The politics of that particular school are very skewed, very apologetic for Islam. So I had difficulties there. And then I started working at the Library of Congress in the Middle Eastern Division, and that was a great job, because it was like the Library of Congress has basically more books than anywhere else in the world, and it gets they get acquisitions constantly. So I had all these tubs full of books written in Arabic that weren't even cataloged, and virtually no one even knew about their existence. And I would peruse through them, and I was shocked. And that's when I found that Al-Qaeda had written several books, of course in Arabic, that more or less contradicted everything they were saying to the West. So, for example, after 9/11, you would often see Osama bin Laden appear in some video, and BBC would translate it, or CNN, and he would continuously make all these arguments to the point that Al-Qaeda or we or the Muslim world in general attacked you or are angry because of your policies, because of Israel, because of grievances. The list went on, and they never talked about religion. And then, of course, the Western media just relayed all that hook, line, and sinker without critically looking into it. Now, these books that I was referring to that I came across in these tubs at the Library of Congress, written in Arabic by Ayman Zawahiri, who's currently the Al-Qaeda lead man, and the late Osama bin Laden, completely contradicted that argument. They said we, first and foremost, hate them, the West, because they're infidels, or in Arabic, kafir, or kuffar. And even if they did everything we want and gave us everything we want, we would still attack them, and we would give them three choices: either convert to Islam or pay jizya and be a dhimmi, and we'll get into all that, basically like a third-class citizen, or fight to the death. And so anyway, that's a long story short of how I wrote my first book, which was called The Al-Qaeda Reader. I translated those texts, and then I juxtaposed them to the propaganda pieces that the West was familiar with. And I think a lot of people saw the contradiction and basically the two-facedness of Al-Qaeda. And that sort of thing's still continuing. But after that, I just got into publishing and writing articles and other books. I wrote Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's New War on Christianity. And, that's like a 300-page book, and it's just based on 2 or 3 years of research. Thank you. The thing about that book, though, is it came out right before the rise of the Islamic State. And so the point is, to a lot of people, when they hear about Christians getting persecuted, for example, in the Islamic world, they immediately associate it with the sort of spectacular stories you hear that involve the Islamic State, bombing of churches or attacks on Christians traveling to monasteries and so forth. But this book was actually written before the rise of the Islamic State. And you got literally in that book, which, like I said, was based only on, I only looked at the last 2 or 3 years before I wrote it. It came out in 2013. So basically, from 2011 to 2013, you literally have hundreds of anecdotes that are not unlike what ISIS or Islamic State was doing. And yet very few of them got reported. And, I have a theory about why that happens. I think it's easy. The media, on the one hand, doesn't mind reporting when an Islamic terrorist group does a spectacular attack, because they have to. They bombed the church, 50 people are dead, etc. So they have to. But then at the same time, because it is a professional Islamic terrorist organization, they can, take the route by saying, okay, it's a terrorist group. We know they have nothing to do with Islam, and and this doesn't represent your average Muslim. But the problem is, and this is why they don't want to talk about the bigger problem. That's why I usually, when I talk about the Islamic State, to me, they're just the tip of a humongous iceberg that's hidden beneath that very few people see. The bigger problem is that when you look at, let's say, the 50 worst nations in the world to be a Christian in, based on, for example, there's an organization, it's called Open Doors, and it's an international human rights organization, and they publish annually a report about the 50 worst nations that abuse the Christians that live there. And lo and behold, 40 out of the 50 habitually are Islamic nations, or basic. So you can almost say 80% of the persecution that Christians are experiencing is at the hands of Muslims. And now these Muslims that do this are not ISIS, they're not Al-Qaeda. They're either governmental figures, oftentimes our friends and allies, like Saudi Arabia, for example. They're just the regular, average, run-of-the-mill Muslim, just the Muslim mob, police, and so forth. So I think the media, they'll talk about the spectacular stuff, but they won't talk about the non-going, less spectacular, but it is definitely persecution, for the obvious reason that when you see it happening at all levels of society, including the government, and you see it happening in all nations, African, black nations, Arab nations, or Iranian nations, Turkey, Central Asia, East Asia, Indonesia, Nigeria, Philippines, Central Asia. I mean, these are places that are different nationalities, ethnicities, languages, cultures, and yet you see the same patterns of persecution. So I think it becomes very clear that the root source of it has to be Islam. And I think that's why a lot of this gets suppressed. I think I've talked enough, but basically that's a sort of introduction of the sorts of views. Yeah.
Yeah, Raymond, let me put this into context, because, again, I think what you're saying, the bigger picture. Today, for instance, the migrants wanted to repay their Italian rescuers by threatening to decapitate them. Is it not obvious, and since you're the scholar, at what point after 9/11 and when we were over in Iraq and Iran. In your opinion, what changed or who changed the discourse? Because the discourse was, obviously these are Islamic radicals that are doing this, blah, blah, blah. But the press is complicit. Now we've seen the destruction of Europe, and in your book, The Sword and the Scimitar, you go through all the different battles. But I think it's really critical in the first hour here to establish the mindset, because here's the thing. The American people seemingly don't care as long as it's Christians. The butchering of Christians in Egypt goes on and on and on. Actually, it goes on and on and on all over the world. When Angela Merkel said nothing about the Islamic decapitation of the little baby, or when Sweden and Norway absolutely give their women to plunder, and then they want to embrace Sharia law in the United States and FGM, female genital mutilation. How is it, and maybe you can help us understand this, how is it that Islamic women seem to submit to being no better than dogs because they're treated that way, and would go along with, body mutilation, and then the rest of the women, Muslim women in the world, see their, quote, sisters, and I'm talking about any woman who's a woman, being stoned, being beheaded, being, horrifically tortured, brutalized, gang raped, and the story of what has gone on with the Yazidi women and everything else, it's just so heartbreaking. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, when I heard a woman who was so abused that her insides were on the outsides, and she begged to die. So where can I ask you the bottom line? I don't know if you and I've never done an interview before, but we'll work backwards. But the bottom line, why does the West fail to see the war that is against them? Three questions, why do the women in the West seemingly embrace this most intolerant to female behavior? And third, when did it change, in your opinion, maybe we'll go there first, that basically, the Christians became the bad guys, and we know the devil's behind it. We know this is the end times, and also, if you haven't read Albert Pike's Third World War statement, whether he wrote it or somebody else wrote it, turning the Muslims against the Christians against the Muslims against the Jews, and then they bring on the pure doctrine of Lucifer. Mm-hmm. So let's take that first question. In your opinion, sir, what was the changing point in the public, actually in the military, where all of a sudden, as the Muslim threat diminished, and they would never deal with the ideology, they would only deal with the event. There's a true statement. And yet, then, if you remember, then patriots and anybody who's a homeschooler. But at the end of the day, here's the bottom line, and if you'd feed back to this, Muslims good, Christians bad. In your opinion, how did that come to pass?
All right, Steve, that's a lot. And you know what? I actually wrote them all down in bullet points, so I'm going to address them.
You like that compound? Mr. Ibrahim, I get used to these compound questions from Steve Quayle, and they're all, I love them too. It covers the waterfront. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it does. And I got them all down. So I may not go in this exact order, that you said, but I do believe I'll be able to address them all. So let's just start with the Muslim worldview, okay? The Muslim worldview, when you think about it, and I'm actually going to address all of them at once, kind of in and out, kind of like meld them together. So the problem with the West and why it does not understand the Muslim worldview is because it just projects itself onto everyone, okay? And so if we are all materialists and we all, even if we're religious and if we're Christians, like most Western Christians are, it's kind of like a skin deep thing. I do it on the side. It's very, it's to myself. I don't bother anyone. I don't talk about it. You can't really differentiate between a secular atheist and a Christian. Okay, so that kind of mentality has been projected onto the Muslim world. And so when they scream jihad and we want to kill you and I'm ready to blow myself up for Allah, because all of that is so alien to the Western secular mind, they have to rationalize it and come up with a paradigm that explains it. Because, of course, they've projected themselves. These people can't honestly mean it because everyone's like me. Okay, so then that's where you get the famous grievance paradigm. Okay, the more Muslims attack and kill people, the more that's a reflection of them being upset at what someone's done to them. Okay, And that, of course, is baloney. In fact, what I was referring to, the Al-Qaeda reader, my first book, Al-Qaeda, all they said is we have grievances, grievances, grievances. But then up front, they said, yeah, we said we have grievances, but we also hate them per se because they're infidels. And in fact, the Islamic State, I'll give them credit for at least being a little more forthright than other Islamic groups like Al-Qaeda, because they wrote in one of their issues last year, they actually addressed the question, why do we fight you and why do we hate you? And they said verbatim, we fight and hate you first and foremost because you are non-Muslims, and we are commanded to do so. And then it was actually a bullet point list. And then somewhere like in the seventh point, after the first one was because you're an infidel. That's why. Somewhere all the way down, it was like, and because, you're unjust to us, or, you attacked us in here, or you invaded Iraq, whatever. And then even there, they made it a point after saying that in the seventh point or so, they said, but it's important for you to understand that even if you didn't do that, we would hate you because you're an infidel. And then they quote the Quran, Surah 64, which says to Muslims, you have a good example in Abraham, okay? Because, of course, Abraham, the prophet, they take him as a prophet and he's been appropriated, but he's been changed because they say you have a good example in Abraham because he said to his people, because the biblical account is Abraham just leaves because God calls him to leave his people, etc. But in the Islamic account and in the Quran, not only does he break away from them, but he tells them nothing, hate and enmity will forever reign between me, Abraham, or a believer, and you. And he was talking to his relatives, his family. And so this is the doctrine, actually, it's a well-known doctrine amongst Muslims. I can give you the Arabic name, but I usually translate it as loyalty and enmity. And it's very well grounded in the Quran. And it's a very tribalistic mentality, which basically, if you're not Muslim, then I hate you. And the Quran literally calls on believers to dislike their fathers, their brothers, all their relative, if for the sole reason that they're not Muslim. Okay, now, to go back a little bit, how this happened, one of the theories I have about Muhammad is the reason he was so successful, okay, is because he essentially created a religion completely based on the tribal mores of 7th century Arabian Bedouin culture, which is fundamentally tribal. Okay, so he created this doctrine, so from now on, it wasn't just one tribe fights another tribe, as it always was in Arabia. It's now we're all one tribe, Arabs, basically, or Muslims, as they call themselves, and the enemy is everyone else who's a non-Muslim. And the whole thing is just because tribal warfare, if you're outside the tribe, you're nothing. Okay, if I find you out in the desert, I kill you, I rape you, I enslave you, I plunder you. That's how it is, because you're not part of the tribe. So that mentality still exists today in Islam. It's just the names have changed. It's not a tribe. It's now the non-Muslim is an outsider. He's the other, and he's just free game. And that's exactly how Islam and Islamic law was created. And that's why you have this sort of dichotomized worldview and this loyalty and enmity, loyalty to fellow Muslims, enmity to non-Muslims, and so forth. Okay, so that goes way back, and you still have it today. So that's a little bit about the Muslim world and the sort of enmity that developed. Now, the question about the West today, why is it, why doesn't it get it? What's going on? Why are they doing all this? These, of course, are all very important questions. I believe it depends on, who we're talking about, because obviously the West is made up of different individuals. So on the one hand, I believe there's a lot of ignorance, okay, actual innocent ignorance. And I think this is more prevalent amongst the general society, just the populace, because they've been essentially brainwashed by a lying media. Then on the higher ups, I think it's willful deception, because you can't be a person with a PhD in Islamic studies, who's spent his whole life doing it, and then say the sorts of things that they say, which is all a lie and meant to whitewash and exonerate Islam. So you definitely have a lot of deception going on too. And now why that, so ignorance is easily understood. As far as deception goes, that's definitely something that we're going to address a little more, the motive behind the deception. But you were also asking me, why would an Islamic woman submit? Well, the answer is in these regions and in these countries, the education system is essentially pure indoctrination. Okay, what they translate here in the United States, when they say something like Al-Azhar University, okay, which is the most prestigious university, quote unquote, in the Islamic world, located in Cairo, it is not a university. The concept of university, here we go again. This is a Western construct being projected onto Islam. It's not a university. It's a madrasa. And a madrasa is basically a place where you go and, to be honest, you get indoctrinated and brainwashed into Islam. Okay, so the same reason that you can get a young man who gets so indoctrinated to the point that he decides to go blow himself up and die is the same reason you have a lot of these Muslim women who, will put on the burqa and so forth and get beaten and try to proselytize other women to come and join it. It's a pretty indoctrinated system. And again, I would caution the reader or the listener not to, project this sort of Western free thinking thing out there, because in these places there isn't any of this free thinking. It's straight up indoctrination, and it's considered a good thing. Because we're talking about the one religion in the world that says on record, if you leave it, we kill you. Okay, that doesn't speak volume. That doesn't speak much for its confidence. Okay, and there's actual Islamic clerics like Yusuf al-Qaradawi, considered one of the most important sheikhs or clerics in the Islamic world, who's on record saying if it wasn't for the apostasy penalty, meaning that if it wasn't for Islam, obligating Muslims to kill a Muslim who tries to leave the religion, he said Islam would have died right away. They don't, while you and I hear that and we think to ourselves, well, gee, don't you get it? Don't you see that means no one wants it? No one wants to be part of it unless they're forced. They don't understand that. To them, it's been accepted that force and the sword and subjugation is what God wants. And that is how truth, quote unquote, is spread. So the point of this whole excursus is to just tell you that it's a really different worldview, the Islamic worldview. And just to cap it off, I'll use a technical term. There in Arabic, there's the term, it's called usul al-fiqh, okay? And what that is usually, most English translators will translate it into the roots of jurisprudence, okay? And then what they mean by that is the Quran and the Hadith, basically the Sunnah, the example of Muhammad as recorded in these what are called Hadith collections. And a couple other things, but those are the pillars, those two things. Now, what's interesting is it's not an accurate translation, as most people do, of that word. It's not the roots of jurisprudence. It's actually the roots of knowledge. The word fiqh actually means knowledge. So what we're talking about here, the roots of knowledge, that's our English word, epistemology. So what that means is the entire Islamic worldview and the paradigm that they use to sift reality through is fundamentally based on, one, the Quran and what it says, and two, the words and deeds of Muhammad, all of which are just antithetical to all the values that Western civilization holds dear. Okay, so this is this is a way to let you understand why we're having this conflict. And when we get into the history, then it'll even be clearer, because you'll realize this conflict's been going on in even a more extreme way for centuries. Now, the West. So what's going on in the West and this sort of embrace in Islam and, why are Christians always a bad guy and so forth. So my belief is the people, the groups, the entities, I said, I've actually written an article about this. I call them fools or liars. You can either be one or the other or a little bit of both, but there's no other way to rationalize all these people who just don't get it about Islam. You either just can't get reality, you're mentally challenged, or you're just being, disingenuous. Okay, so let's look at the disingenuous group right now. Obviously, there's a lot of ignorant people, some, willful, some it's really not their fault, because if you're part of the public school system, if you watch TV, if you watch movies, the narrative is consistent. Islam good, Christians bad.
Okay, let me stop you there, because again, I think one of the words that is really critical, we're seeing this in the whole Trump, escapade by the crooked DOJ and everybody else. Islam defines, correct me if I'm wrong, but Islam neglects real history or empiric history and puts everything within the framework of their rewritten history according to the Prophet Muhammad and according to all of their writings. So in essence, don't pay attention to anything in the world. Just pay attention to only what we tell you. So in essence, they basically are putting all their followers in a box, and if you don't jump into their box, they cut your head off or they do whatever they do. So they control the narrative.
No, that is correct.
That's what I think you're saying. Is that not correct?
And this goes all the way back. For example, Muhammad came around and, he basically tried to put himself in the footsteps of the Old Testament prophets and then in Jesus. And then next thing you know, he appropriated them. And all of a sudden, the books of the Jews and the books of the Christians were tampered with. The current Bible that we have has been willfully manipulated by, whatever Christians or Jews for whatever reason they had. And so the Quran has been sent down to straighten it all out. So if the New Testament talks about the divinity of Christ or his crucifixion and his resurrection, all of which, of course, Islam rejects, that's because it was tampered with. And so now we have the final word, which is the Quran. Now, what proof do they have that the Bible or the Old or the New Testaments were tampered with? Zero. They can't show anything. We have Greek manuscripts of the Bible from the 1st century, and they say the same thing. So why do they accept it? Because that's what they're told, and they accept it on faith or on indoctrination, if you will. And now, what you said about history is the same exact thing. The teaching of history, and I mean, as you probably well know, Western standards of history are such that there are now legitimate questions about even the existence of Muhammad. Okay, and that's not because there's a dearth of sources on Muhammad. There's a ton. But the early the historiography tradition of the Islamic world has become so under criticism by true scholars that it's just all basically fabricated. Now, I personally, and I have good reason to believe that a person, maybe his name wasn't Muhammad or whatever it was, but there was definitely some guy who said he was a prophet and who taught the concept of jihad, basically warfare, and if you die, you go to heaven and you get the 90 or 72 virgins or whatever. I think that's definitely legitimate because we have very early writings, actually 2 years after Muhammad's traditional death date in 634. You actually have non-Muslims who talk about a prophet in Arabia who's coming with bloodshed and so forth. So I definitely think he existed, but in the Islamic world, and I'll give you another example. So in Egypt, Egypt was, it was pharaonic, and then the Greeks, Alexander the Great came, it became Hellenistic, and then Rome came, and basically it was Greco-Roman in language and culture, in Greek especially. They spoke Greek for almost 1,000 years before Islam came, from basically 320 BC up until 640 AD. So we're talking about 1,000 years. When you go and you look at the curriculum of history in Egypt, about Egypt, that whole section is virtually gone. Okay, and then after, of course, the Roman period, you got Christianity. St. Mark is the one who went and proselytized Egypt, and it was one of the heaviest Egyptian Christian nation up until the Islamic conquest. Okay, all of that is completely gone in Islamic history. They talk a little bit about pharaohs and then how wonderfully the Muslims came and entered. And here's a good one. They don't use the word conquest in Arabic whenever they're talking about Islam conquering. They use a euphemism. The Arabic word is fath, kind of like the Palestinian group, F-A-T-H, heavy H. And what that word means is opening. And so therefore, any country that the Islamic world went into and essentially ransacked and murdered and slaughtered and plundered, it's not called a conquest. It's called an opening, because it was done altruistically to bring the wonderful light of Islam to the denizens of that nation. And so that's just to give you an idea of how history is taught and whitewashed and euphemized. Okay, but if you want, I can get now into why the West is why now in the West Islam's the good guy and Christians are the bad guy. And this is actually very
Before you do, I want to ask Raymond. I want to ask you a question, okay? And we'll go to that right away. But do you not think it interesting that obviously Obama's Islamic roots, and then the highest ranking military members and the highest ranking intelligence under Obama some of those guys are openly, they converted to Islam, okay? So, and then you have, Valerie Jarrett, who basically said in 1974 that, I think it was 74 at Berkeley, that her goal was to turn America into an Islamic nation. I think this is paraphrasing, using their own laws. So did that not show up? I'm sure it did, but on your radar, if you had the military, you had the intelligence community, and you had the president stacking the leading law enforcement agencies, whether it was the DHS, FEMA, whatever, with high-ranking Islamic, if you would, plans, did that also take part, in your opinion, in the changing of the whole, if you will, war against, quote, militant Islam and their, quote, Islamic war against the West? Is that, how much does that play into your investigation or study? And then go ahead and just take that question and go on.
Sure. Well, we can talk about generic Western leaders and just how much they have contributed to the Islamic cause. And then you got Obama, okay, who's his own.
But you've also got Clapper, I think, and you've got some of those guys. And Doug, do you remember there was a list of those guys? But obviously, you had at one point you had the head of the CIA and you had the head of the National Security Agency talking about it. And now you've got mayors of major cities converting, and you've got the Canadian Prime Minister, a closet Muslim, who basically is. I'm talking about Trudeau. So what I'm saying is this, and I think this is what I'm just asking you to address, and then just go straight in. And I think it's important for people. This is what I would call the bottom line in this, is that when the West quit recognizing Islam for the threat it was, then these people in national intelligence, in the military, I can remember, I got to be careful here. I can remember having discourses with some generals saying, "Don't you understand? That they are controlling the narrative." And their answer to me was, "Of course we understand it, but unfortunately we have to take orders from the higher ups, and they're all embracing it." So go ahead, and then I'll be quiet until the break.
Sure. Well, the idea that there's an active Islamic infiltration at the highest echelons of the government is absolutely true. And you've mentioned various different lesser than president type peoples, okay, generals and all these other Clapper and so forth, and I think that's definitely all legitimate. But just for time's sake, I'll focus on Obama real quick, because what's important about him is whereas others, some people will argue, well, that's just a theory, it hasn't been proven that he's a Muslim, it's an accusation, etc. Fine, let's put that aside. Now, Obama. Okay, of all the U.S. presidents whoever became presidents, he so fundamentally understands Islam. And the reason for that is, he grew up in Indonesia. Okay, Indonesia is the world's largest, most populous Muslim nation. They go through, you often hear, for a while, I don't know about it anymore, but you would often hear that Indonesia is an example of a moderate Islamic country. Well, I don't think so. The same sorts of things that you see everywhere happen there. If a Christian uses the word Allah, he gets arrested. He's blasphemy, he gets in jail, maybe killed, etc. So by Western standards, yes, it's still radical. Okay, now he went to those schools, those madrasas, and he grew up with that culture and with that understanding. So, there's pictures of him in Somalia, and Somalia is about the most radical Islamic nation around. And him dressing up like a Somali sheikh or cleric and so forth. So this man definitely understands Islam, and yet he would come up and give us the same routine about Islam means peace and this and that. So that was obviously a lie, and he's trying to dupe the American people. But like you said, this is happening on many levels, lesser levels, not just the president, and it is an active project to basically infiltrate the government and I know a lot of people won't believe this, and they'll say, "Oh, come on, how can America become an Islamic nation or be run by Islam?" Well, look at the changes America's gone through from its roots already. It's not that far-fetched to believe that something like that could also happen. So I definitely believe in all that, and I think that is happening. Okay, but on a more sort of metaphysical level, or on why they can get away with this. In other words, 100 years ago, could you even get a guy like Obama to become president and do what he's doing? I don't think so. So the question is, why have your average American become so complacent or indifferent or even active in this sort of Islamic cause? And my belief is it is diametrically connected. I'm sorry, not diametrically. It's just integrally connected. It's a counterpart of the sort of Western secular atheist hostility to Christianity. To put it simply, it's a sort of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You look around and you see all these groups that you would think would be at the forefront of being critical of Islam, homosexual groups, ultra liberals, you name it, feminists. And what do? They are defenders of Islam. They whitewash it. They support it. Okay, now why is that? I personally believe it's because their ultimate foe is Christianity. It's a Christian heritage, Christian culture, because that's what they come from, and that's what touches them deeply, because that's their actual background. Islam, they could care less about. It's just another pawn to set up against what they really want to see go down, which is essentially the Christian heritage. So I think that's another big and often misunderstood or not spoken about component that fuels so many of these liberal types who otherwise you would think would have nothing to do with Islam or want nothing to do with it. And yet they're amongst the most militant supporters of it. So in short, it's a concerted war, and it always has been, on Christianity from all these various elements. And in many ways, Islam is just one of the prongs of this actual attack. And it's being used by other groups of people. And I mean, I know this is the sorts of things that you all talk about, and there's obvious truth in all this. So that's what I'm seeing, this idea that, what other civilization can you think of where the people of it hate and despise their ancestors? And yet their ancestors have probably done more for the world than any other civilization. There's a riddle for you. If you get an Arab or a Muslim or an African or an Asian and Chinese or whatever, they venerate or their ancestor, they're proud of their history, and usually there's not a whole lot there to go on. And then you turn to the West, which did so much in the realms of whatever you name it, science, discovery, and so forth, and yet their descendants are just so disgusted of their ancestors. And so you have to ask yourself, what is going on in this particular civilization? And to me, the answer is it is an intentional war trying to, this concept of secularism and atheism and liberalism is just these are all different names trying to distance this nation and these people from their spiritual and heritage and roots. And it's just constant demonization, including of the history. And that's why I was saying at the beginning, when you talk about the history, we've been presented with a history that is the exact opposite of reality. And that's intentional, because they're trying to make everyone here hate their own heritage, to break away from it and to distance themselves from it. And I believe this Islam thing is definitely a part of that concerted effort.
Doug, do you have any questions before I ask him my next one?
No, but I do want to come back at some point to that list you referenced, because I think that's important, especially today, because when I say that list, it's important to you. It's important to me. It's important to a lot of other people out there listening. But no, at this point, no, not at all.
Yeah, do you have the list, Doug?
I don't.
In front of you?
No, I don't. Not in front of me. No.
I will pull it up. But Raymond, here is something that I think needs to be addressed. Just as the women, let's say, embrace Islam, and I'm sorry to be blunt, but I don't know how to wake people up. Do you believe, and if this is too uneasy for you to answer, then just say pass on that. And I'm not trying to set you up, and I just don't do that. But one of the things that's amazing to me is the brutality of, and especially it's being introduced around the world, and even people in the United States want to embrace it. Do you believe, I'll be very delicate, if the female actresses and all of the revolutionaries who are female would have to stand in line to undergo female genital mutilation, do you think they would hold to the same ethos that they're now trying to defend out of what I would call not only arrogance, mind control, and just the revolutionary mindset, the spirit behind it? If you contrast the way that Jesus liberated women truthfully and honestly, and nobody, and I said this, and it makes the feminists crazy, nobody did more for women in the world than Jesus Christ. Nobody. So and just real simple yes or no, or you want to qualify it, but if they had to step in line to undergo that procedure, do you think there might be a little bit of defection from the position they hold out of ignorance or mind control?
I think if they were forced to wear a hijab, they would defect immediately. I mean, I think, in other words, I think they're just hypocrites. They're grandstanding hypocrites who don't give a fig about women's rights because women under Islam are treated like chattel, and in fact, the Quran says that. In fact, there's one particular verse that tells men, your women are like fields, so go plow them however you want. So, of course, they wouldn't, and they're just hypocrites. Either they don't know the first thing about Islam, they just know it's not Christianity, therefore it must be, nice and exotic. Or they do know, and they're just, again, it's a way of, juxtaposing and challenging Christian mores and showing them as inferior, and you just praise something like this. So, of course, they're all of them are hypocrites. They would, genital mutilation, give me a break. None of them would go through female circumcision. And if they did, well, why don't they? It's just a matter of grandstanding, just typical liberal bull, essentially, and without even knowing what they're doing, or worse, knowing and just doing it in spite of that because they have their own nefarious agenda.
So basically, the agenda is at just 45 minutes or so into this interview, the point is that they hate Christianity, and they will link up and sync up with anything and everything that is bent on destroying. So obviously, the devil's behind it, the Antichrist. Anything is the spirit against Jesus Christ is the spirit of Antichrist. But even more than that, the whole presence, if you will, of a culture that's embracing suicide. I call it the kamikaze culture, okay? Because in essence, we are committing in this country the end of everything that we believed in, that we've been taught, that our forefathers fought for and died, and that incredible word freedom, that incredible word liberty. And it's not the Christians saying you got to believe like us. It's basically the Muslims saying believe like us or you'll die. And then of course, when they're not killing each other off, you have the Shia and that whole thing, the two Muslim sects. So at this point, if the I think, who is it, the evangelicals, or not the evangelicals, but the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, are all embracing radical Islam, and, the entire, in my opinion, world of what confesses or professes itself to be Christendom in an open-door policy, I mean, that's like inviting somebody who's going to pour poison on your meal to come to dinner, turning your back and saying, oh, didn't you bring me something good for dinner? I mean, the concept, and in the next hour, we'll get into the sword and the scimitar, and you can lay it out. But the point is, the bottom line, America and Americans are allowing, not everyone, but even the leaders in the highest realm are not being honest and taking on, if you will, the fundamental basis, not talking about the fruit of evil, I'm talking about the root of evil. The two faiths are incompatible, are they not?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of this goes to, there's all these philosophical isms, I call them isms, that have just so fundamentally warped, the American or Western worldview. And one of them, of course, is relativism. You can never, there is no more absolute, there is no more truth, there is no more right and wrong. And so no matter what Islam does, well, you have to see it through their eyes, you have to understand it from their mentality and so forth. Whereas, a previous Western person from an earlier generation would just immediately go, that's, wrong. I forget, what was his name. I think there was a British general in India. And when they told him, well, it's our custom to burn a woman with her husband when he dies, he said, well, it's our custom to shoot a man who does that. Okay, but you're not going to get that anymore here because now you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry, brother. That should be applied in its fullest extent,
Exactly.
Is it legal for us to, kill our wives in honor killings? No, and if you do, unfortunately, you'll go to your great reward before your wife, if any honorable man would have it. And see, this is something, too. I'm sorry, this is my pet peeve, the 150,000th one, is that people stand by and give intellectual assent or they divorce themselves intellectually from cold-blooded, murderous, and brutal slaying of men, women, and children, a baby being beheaded by some animal, and I wouldn't call her Angela, I'd call her Animal Merkel, just basically passes it off. And everybody in Great Britain, we've got listeners in Great Britain, not everybody, but it seems like the power brokers are absolutely embracing it, Sweden, Norway, and we'll get into that. But the point is that, what in your opinion, and we got just a couple minutes, what in your opinion is it going to take, or do you believe it will even happen, that the West will wake up, or is it already too late?
I think it's going to have to get a whole lot worse before it could even get better, because the damage has really been done on a very spiritual and intellectual level. Just common sense is gone. Absolutely, it's out the window. Other more robust generations whom, we would scoff at and call backwards, would be able to handle this and deal with it very easily. But here, intellectually, I think people have been so just completely jarred and jaded that it's very hard. Look at it. I'll give you one quick example. Look at a country like Sweden, okay? Here's the descendants of those, great Viking warriors who just would not brook any nonsense. And now Muslim migrants are brought in and they're raping their women and sometimes their men, and nobody's able to do anything about it. So I think a certain paralysis has also infiltrated into the body of the society, where it's not just a matter of I have to be tolerant, I have to turn the other cheek, not in a Christian sense, just because I'm a coward. I think that sort of thing has become so pervasive that people are literally paralyzed from moving, as you see in Sweden and a lot of other Western, Britain and Germany and so forth. So I think, of course, I don't want to be so dismal, but I think there could be a resurgence, but it's going to take a whole lot. Look what's happening right now. Who would tolerate this? Go back some generations to the way people used to think when they had common sense. Who would tolerate any of this? None. So, just as it is right now, it's already ridiculous and nothing's happening. So, you had 9/11, you had all these other attacks and so forth attributed to Muslims, and nothing happens. So what more? If there's a bombing, a terrorist attack in America, and 100,000 people die, what's going to happen? We're probably going to get a lot of leaders telling us, "Oh, don't jump on don't attack Muslims because they're innocent. Those are just terrorists." And then the news will be all about Americans being angry at Muslims and Muslims are the victims and this sort of thing. So I don't know what it will take, but I think it's going to take something big before you have an actual major movement.
Fantastic.
Doug, do we have to go to the break?
Yeah, we're about. Let me just double check here. We're actually past it. So you know what? Let's just skip the break if that's all right with you, with both of you.
Sure.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right.
Raymond's on a roll, and this is critical. Here, I want to say one thing, Raymond, and then, by the way, do you mind being
Ray? Everyone I know calls me Ray.
Okay, well,
everyone
my
friends call me Ray, so go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I want to be respectful because I admire you. I absolutely read everything you write. I try and post everything I get my hands on that you write. But here's the thing that people have to understand. This is a war. It is not something you get to, just come into if you're feeling like it when you get off of your easy chair or lazy boy and, go to the fridge and you just, all those poor people over there. We sat back, ladies and gentlemen, and watched tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Christians slaughtered worldwide. And the pukes, and this makes my listening, or people that listen to me, those who have denied the Lord Jesus Christ, only those do I call pukes in the pulpit. There are men and women of God that stand stalwart, But those people that deny this and deny it's happening or deny it can happen here, and look at the, if you will, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants or the white Catholics, and you're getting probably only 3 countries that are standing up against it. You're getting Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. If I were going to move any place, and I mean this, I'd probably go to Hungary because I so admire their president. And yet people don't even understand the history. If it weren't for those countries, everybody would be listening to the most beautiful call in the world, quote unquote, Barack Obama. What's that called when they go and, call to prayer?
It's the Muazzin, or the Muazzin, yeah.
Yeah, and so if everybody wants to put it into perspective, this is total, and this is mine, don't get mad at Raymond for this, this is totally horse manure that people won't see the wicked fruit of a wicked root. And I'll quote one other quote, is that, watch what I will do for Islam. Barack, the entity, Obama. And by the way, when I say entity, I want to define that. Do you know what I mean when I say entity? That means something other than human, okay? And even, I think it was another radio program, I don't remember which one, Doug, but, the host said, he's a demon. And, Obama addressed that. But most people forgot he's the one showing people his charms in his pocket. One of them is Hanuman, the monkey god. This is who Hanuman is, that stands between heaven and earth. So when you're dealing with superstition, and you're dealing with the occult, and you're dealing with the end-time war, and you're dealing with the spirit of Antichrist versus the spirit of a living God, the spirit of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, it cannot be a recipe for anything other than the ultimate end-time war. And so now let's talk about, if you wouldn't mind. Now, first of all,
before,
the sword and the
Steve,
scimitar, is it out right now?
August 28th is coming out. August 28th, I believe, is the date.
Yeah. It's coming out. It comes out August 28th. But people can pre-order it right now, and they'll get it right when it comes out.
And folks, I pre-ordered that today as well. So I would urge everyone to pre-order a Sword and Scimitar forthwith, because if it's anything like, and I know it is, like Raymond's previous books, it's going to be fantastic. I just have one question, since Steve brought up the talisman. Raymond, you probably have gotten this question all the time, and in the scheme of things, it's probably of very little relevance. But I just, out of curiosity, I'm sure you've seen the controversy with respect to Obama's ring, his so-called Islamic ring. I
recall that. It was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, yes, and there were photographs and enlargements of it. My question to you, is that what Dr. Jerome Corsi and others have said, definitely an Islamic ring with either parts of the Shahada on it or some other type of Islamic writing? Not that it really.
I'm actually looking it up because I remember seeing a picture of it, but I just want to take a good look.
Yeah.
Those look like Arabic writings.
It does, doesn't it?
That could be saying the Shahada. La ilaha. It doesn't look like straightforward Arabic. It's kind of camouflaged.
Okay.
All right. So that's why, if someone argues and says, no, it doesn't say that, it's a design, okay, but I can definitely see how it also is a sort of cryptic Shahada.
I understand. All right. And again, in the scheme of things, it's probably not that critical. However, since Steve brought up the talisman.
No, it is. And I think it's really critical, Doug, because would you define, how do you pronounce the word, dimitude or diminitude?
Yeah, it's actually a coincidence that the two words sound so much alike, because they actually mean the same thing. One's, of course, English and one's Arabic. So the Arabic word, dhimitude is it's a newly minted, coined word that was coined. A lot of people think it was Bat Yor, but it was actually the Lebanese, I think, president or prime minister who was a Christian, because as you know, Lebanon is half Christian, half Muslim. And at some point in the 70s, I believe, or early 80s, he said, we're not going to go back and we're not going to embrace dhimitude. Anyway, it's based on the Arabic word dhimma. Dhimma, I know it's hard to pronounce. You can just say dhimmi. And what that word means is based, and it's pivotal to Islamic Sharia or Islamic law. The root meaning of the word is someone or something that's blameworthy. Okay, it's blameworthy, it's culpable, and it has to somehow make restitution. So when the historic Islamic conquest, which we'll get into, happened, and non-Muslims were conquered, primarily Christians, but also Jews, who are both defined in Islamic lore as the people of the book, or Ahl al-Kitab. If they wanted to keep their religion, they were allowed to, and they became dhimmis, which basically means they are blameworthy because they're infidels who refuse to embrace Islam, and therefore, in order to stay alive and practice their religion, they had to submit to a whole bunch of stipulations, all of which, to a great degree, were meant to degrade them, and there's your diminution. Okay, so not only did they have to pay a special tax, but when they paid it, sometimes they had to go through a ritual and get choked, walk on all fours. The tax collector, who's a Muslim, would choke them and slap them and yank their beard and tell them this is the price for being an infidel and this is what allows you to live amongst us and so forth. And then, of course, the rights they have were nothing. You can't build a church. You can't have a visible cross. You can't have a Bible out anywhere. You can't have a church bell. Let's say for Christians, you can't proselytize. And then all the opposite, of course. If someone wants to proselytize a Christian, he can do it. The worth of a Christian's word in a court of law is half of a Muslim. So if it's if a Muslim and a Christian are in a court of law and the Muslim accuses a Christian, he wins by default just because he's a Muslim. So you have, and that's just the beginning of it. I mean, there's a Christian had to get up from his seat and offer it to a Muslim if a Muslim wants it, and that kind of thing. This dhimmitude, and that's a good word because it really does describe it, still exists today in the Islamic world amongst Christians constantly. They can't build churches. They can't have crosses visible. They can't have bells. Once they're killed, abducted, raped, they have no recourse to the law because the police and the authorities are Muslim and they don't care. And oftentimes they even work with the perpetrators of the crimes and so forth. So all of this is still alive. But there is, and I think maybe this is what you're looking at or trying to touch on, there's also the concept of Western dhimmitude. Now, this is a strange animal to me because on the one hand, traditional historic dhimmitude means you are a Christian under our power, and now you have to live as a submissive person, a third-class citizen, and that's the price for you to stay a Christian, okay? Now, what's strange about that coming now is a lot of people use the word dhimmi to describe Western people and their approach to Islam. So the charge is that a lot of Western people are willing to basically, submit themselves and kowtow to Islam and appease Islam. And as you see in Europe, conceal their crosses and not offend Muslims by celebrating Christmas. And so this is a sort of unnatural dhimmitude that, strangely is enforced by the Westerners onto themselves because the Muslims who are, of course, in Europe or wherever don't have the power to do anything about it, whereas the Christians under Islamic territory or conquered territory had to live that way or die or pay the consequence. But it's strange to see Western people who've taken on this mentality of always needing to appease Muslims and make their own sacrifices not to offend Muslims, which is exactly and of course Muslims expect that. And so it's like a perfect, harmony. Muslims come and they want infidels. They're used to seeing Christians in their own territory, being submissive. And then they come and they're the minority. And then all of a sudden they find the majority is doing the same thing. And all of that, by the way, just breeds contempt, for the record. And I can tell you that for a fact. All of this sort of appeasement, let's do this so they can like us, only breeds absolute and utter contempt. And Muslims despise the people who do that. And we can even talk about this later when we look at the history aspect. But even the Crusaders, the Muslims, as much as they hated and fought them, had great respect for them because they were kind of on the same level. They both believed in what they believed, and they believed in their God and their scriptures and so forth. And they're both fighting for the same thing. So, they're worthy enemies. Now they come and all they see before them, all these Western leaders and media and all these people, they don't believe in anything, and they're, ready to give their churches away, turn them into mosques, anything. And somehow all these Western people think this will make the Muslims like them. Sorry, it makes them have nothing but disgust and contempt for them. And they just exploit it and they take advantage of it. And and that's human nature. When someone acts and grovels bore you, it's not going to make you necessarily like them as much as have contempt. And that's why that's why this is so. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to interrupt you there. That's exactly what Trump, there's a lot of the world that hates him, but one thing, nobody else brought Kim Jong-un to the table. And look, here's the deal. And I'm sorry it's this way, but, even the scripture says the kingdom of God suffers violence and the violent take it by force. And we've got a guy with a backbone and Donald Trump, and I get a lot of flack for saying that. But look at NATO. NATO has been tied by a belt underneath a milk cow and providing no money for their own defense, and and they bust Donald Trump's I got to say this right. They bust him all the time for supposedly having deals with the Russians, and yet, as the news headlines have stated, 70% of Europe is reliant on the Russians, their natural gas and oil. So what you're saying there is being lived out in the headlines that they only respect. Now get into the Crusades, if you would, because early on when I first started talking about this, and I did 20 years ago on talk radio and started generating flack, and Doug will remember 18 years ago he was personally involved and having to go into the city because there were a lot of people that were unhappy and wanted me dead, and that's how Doug and I got friends, and we had a thing called the Eggman Quayle HQ Intel Alert. But share the Crusade story, because I get so tired of saying and you know this, it's the nanny goat answer. The Christians started the Crusades and they killed more Muslims than the Muslims killed Christians. I mean, and I'm sorry, but that's horse feathers. So will you deal with the Crusades, the length of time they took place, and what's wrong with that? Embracing the bottom of the enemy and giving I guess you'd say a northbound burrow, a southbound kiss of the enemy, because that's the most tactful way I've ever said that. That's critical that people understand that. Go ahead, Raymond.
Absolutely. So before I start with the Crusades, I have to give a little more context, because in order to really appreciate what the Crusades were, which is what you're saying, we got to go back about 400 years earlier. And that's exactly what people don't do. And that's why the Crusades are often presented in a vacuum. And then and in that context, the Europeans appear as the aggressors. So now we're actually really touching on the topics of my book, which is actually fine, because now I'll start from the beginning. And I'll just give you a quick summary, and then we'll get into the Crusades, because they're more important than most people think, but not for the reasons that people think. Okay, so in we were talking about Muhammad and the doctrine of loyalty and enmity and jihad and tribalism, and so instead of tribes fighting each other, now they're fighting for Allah against the other, who is basically anyone who's not a Muslim. Okay, so in the 7th century, when after Muhammad dies traditionally at 632 AD, and now you got all of Arabia after some 2 years of what's called the Ridda Wars or apostasy wars. And here's another anecdote that few people understand. After Muhammad died, so many of the Arabs who were basically nominal Muslims, because that's you say the Shahada, become a Muslim if you want to get some part of the plunder and if you don't want to be at the end of Muhammad's sword. So once he died, like a majority of them just left and said, okay, the jig is up, it's over, it was a good run, now we're out. So the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, wouldn't have that. And he launched all these wars, and in Islamic historiography, they're called the Ridda. Ridda means apostasy. So basically, this is the first major war of Islam, and it was against apostates. That is, Muslims who didn't want to be Muslims. And literally tens of thousands of Muslims were butchered, crucified, and burned alive to bring them back into the fold of Islam. Now, once that was done, and to keep their raiding spirit alive and not to attack each other, then the great conquests of history happened, and they went forth. Okay, so after one of the major battles, which is one of my chapters, it's called the Battle of Yarmouk, which was actually my aforementioned master's thesis from 20 years ago. After that battle in 636 AD, basically the Roman Empire, or what we call the Byzantine Empire, started crumbling in the east. And in basically from 636 until 700 AD, okay, all of North Africa and Southwest Asia were conquered permanently by the sword of Islam. Now, here's what people don't get. If you go back into the 7th century, all right, and you talk about Christendom, because now Christianity has been around for over 600 years, all right, and so what was the Christian world? If you took a map and you looked at the Christian world at the dawn of Islam in, let's say, around 630 AD, it was in Europe, basically, west of the Rhine, south of the Danube, that area, including Great Britain, and then all of North Africa, okay, from Morocco, and I'm giving them their modern day names, to Egypt, and then Southwest Asia, or basically Syria. It was known as Greater Syria, but modern day Syria, Lebanon, Palestinian territory, Iraq, or the western portion of Iraq, and of course, what we call today Turkey or Anatolia, Asia Minor. Okay, now that was actually, if you go back into church history and church and Christian history, the heart of the Christian world was there. It was in North Africa and it was in Southwest Asia. You had 5 Christian sees, or basically centers. Only one was in the West, and that's Rome. All other 4 were in the East: Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, Egypt. Okay, so in the first 100 or less, actually, about 70 years after Muhammad dies, 3 of those centers are permanently conquered forever by Islam. And that's Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. And obviously Jerusalem's not forever, because now you have the modern state of Israel in charge. Okay, but so all that area is swallowed up. Now, what you got left is Europe. And then in 709 AD, the Muslims enter Europe through Spain, okay? And this is such a sad chapter, because every time Spain comes up in the context of Islam, we get this big story about how wonderful Islam is in Spain and the golden era, et cetera, et cetera. And my God, take a good look at the primary sources, as I have, written in Latin and in Arabic. And it's just bloodshed. It's ISIS. Think of ISIS on an exponential level, okay? It's just pyramids of heads, burning churches with people in them alive, enslaving women, raping them, and the whole 9 yards that we're accustomed to, okay? That is Islam's entry into Spain. You're not going to hear that from most people. I watched some well-known, some woman who made a documentary about, Andalusia, as they call it, and she literally, she just said what I said, but all she said is, Islam was introduced into Spain in 709 or 711, I'm sorry, and then before long it was it flowered and everyone wanted to be Muslim. Okay, that's just a big lie. What you had in Spain is what you saw in Syria and Iraq recently with ISIS, except on a much larger level. Okay, anyway, so you move a little bit forward, and now we're in 732 AD. And you got the Muslims in France, or basically the lands of the Franks. They were known as the Franks at the time. Gaul, basically, Roman Gaul. So now you get all these Muslims there, and everyone who's heard, or anyone who knows anything about history, has heard about the Battle of Tours in 732, or Poitiers. And basically, Charles the Hammer stops the Muslims, and they go back. It wasn't that easy. He did beat them at Tours in 732, but they were there for decades on the Pyrenean Mountains on the border of Spain, constantly waging raids, to the point, and few people know this, Muslims got to the point that they were in Switzerland for decades in the 900s, waging raids to abduct people for slaves. Because, and I show this in the book, in Sword and Scimitar, habitually the Muslims from the East always not just wanted slaves, but they always wanted white, fair, blonde, haired, blue-eyed, green-eyed slaves. They wanted European slaves. There was a thriving market for European slaves, and they were mostly gotten from Spain into France, and also from Anatolia and into Byzantium and so forth, and I'll get into that. So that was one of the primary reasons. And how many people know that today, that Muslims were actually perched in Switzerland, of all places, and waging raids all into Europe, okay? And it didn't stop there. I mean, as we'll see soon, I mean, they got to Iceland. And, how many people know about that either? Anyway, so eventually they got pushed back and they were confined to Spain, okay? And then in the east, Byzantium, which is really the continuation of the Roman Empire, which was hardcore Christian Orthodox, and that was the nemesis of the Islamic Empire. So what you had is Islam constantly bombarding Constantinople, but they had their big walls, and it kept them going for 700 years. But eventually they took all of Anatolia in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. And basically, I tell this story in my book, by the way, around these battles. That's why I mention them, because these battles are important, and some people have heard of them. I mean, everyone's heard of Tours and the Siege of Vienna and so forth. But what I tried to do is really show you the context, because when you hear it, it's okay, it's a battle and one group wins. But when you see the context, I mean, these people in Europe, these Christians, were really fighting for their lives. It was, a matter of life and death. It was think of ISIS just, to the 10th degree, and with 300,000-400,000 people invading with swords on horses and doing this sort of thing. So this was a life and death sort of thing. Anyway, they eventually took Anatolia in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. And that date's important, 1071. You know why? Because the Crusades were called in 1095 as an absolute direct result to what was happening after that battle in 1071. So what was happening? After the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, all of Anatolia, which was that's where St. Paul wrote his letters to. All those churches were in Anatolia, or what we call Turkey today. That was one of the most ancient Christian regions. And after the Muslims conquered that region, it was just a continuous bloodbath after 1071, for years until 1095. And that was the reason that Pope Urban II called the Crusades. So today, the Crusades are presented as in a vacuum. That's what I was saying. The Crusades are just a bunch of greedy white European men who are just doing what they want. They're going to the Middle East. I guess they want oil. I guess, even though they couldn't harness oil back then, but it's that mentality. No, if you look at the sources, those guys, and they were kings and princes and nobles. They made, especially, I would recommend the writings by Jonathan Riley Smith, one of the best known modern historians. He's deceased right now, and also Thomas Madden. But they've shown you by looking at the archives that all of these princes and kings who went crusading made a huge sacrifice. They actually sold land. They did this and that, and they sold it cheap just so they can raise armies. And it was all done in the context of providing succor to their fellow Christians in the East, and also for liberating the tomb of Christ, the sepulchre in Jerusalem. Those were the twin aims continuously preached. And that's why they went and they marched for thousands of miles, and they died from starvation and from Turkish arrows and from plague. And they continued just so they can bring, as I said, relief to the indigenous Christians of the East, and also to liberate the sepulchre, or the tomb of Christ, as they called it. Okay, now let's move back to, so that's my introduction to your question about those big bad crusades. All right, well, now when we hear about the crusades, it's in the vacuum, isn't it? We're always told, oh yeah, these guys, as I was saying, these evil, big, bad white guys went and ruined it, and the Muslims were so nice and friendly. And no, that's what's going on. If you look at the writings of Princess Anna Komnena, and she was the daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Alexius when this was happening, when the First Crusade was happening. Continuously, she writes about literally hundreds of thousands of Christians in the East, in Anatolia, being butchered alive and being burned alive and being enslaved and being raped and crucified, and thousands of churches being burned, in Armenia and all these regions, Georgia and so forth. And that's the context that's no longer available, and that's why I want to write this book, to bring it out. It's not available now. What you hear is, oh yeah, they just decided, these crusaders, to go there. Well, they went there, and what's interesting is, so now let's, compare and contrast with today. These guys, for all their faults, who went there crusading, these men sacrificed so much, it's hard to imagine. They sacrificed their land, their titles, their families. Most of them died, and it was all to fulfill Christ's commandment, 2 commandments, which is love your fellow man as yourself and love God. And to them, loving God meant, liberating the sepulchre. And their fellow man or their fellow Christian who was being killed and tortured and maimed by Muslims and enslaved. That's why they went. Now, this heroic story, which, it's so, look at the sacrifice these men went through only to go and provide succor. And this is what I'm trying to show you. This story has now been turned into, these are the evil bad guys. These are the horrible people that Western Europeans of today need to distance themselves and hate. And we have to be more, and Saladin, what a wonderful, tolerant guy, even though his dying wish was, after I repulse the Crusaders, I want to go into Europe and kill everyone who does not embrace Islam. You don't get that part, or the part that he used to in Egypt, because that's where he was based. He used to cover every church with tar and break their crosses and crucify Christians. That part's always missing when we praise Saladin and his wonder. But so now you're starting to see, and I'm going to stop now, but now you see how this story of the Crusades, which is actually a story of faith and sacrifice, has been turned into a story of greed and evil. And there, to me, is one of the kernels and one of the keys to understand how far the West has gone, that they've turned a great story into a horrible story, and a story for them to be ashamed of. And that's why they're now kowtowing and trying to please Muslims. And at the same time, the Muslims are only finding contempt in that, because at least they could respect the Crusaders because they were worthy adversaries.
Well, I think, too, one of the most important issues that people have got to understand is we are seeing in Erdogan, are we not, the call for, he's the one that made the statement, and I guess everybody in the State Department needs to sit down, and the U.S. Pentagon needs to sit down and listen to a replay. Islam is Islam. There is no such thing. And it was a Muslim, head of Turkey, that made that statement, and now he wants to be the new head of the total caliphate, over all the Middle East. And isn't that a dichotomy? I don't know if Turkey's a seated member in NATO or an invited member of NATO. I don't know the actual answer to my own question there. But does not it surprise you that, as Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun? And now, just as the great tyrants in history have risen, to draw the holy war, didn't he just call all Muslims worldwide to make war on Jerusalem?
It's funny you mentioned the Solomon Ecclesiastes thing, because actually the epigram for my book is that verse. There's nothing new under the sun. What was will be. What was done before will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun, and that's what we're seeing. And this business about Erdogan, this is actually a perfect segue to continue what I was talking about, because after the Crusades, what you had is the rise of the Turks, the Ottomans. Okay, and this is actually going to shed a little light on why, you were talking earlier about Hungary and Poland and Slovakia. These countries seem to have a little more common sense when it comes to Muslim migrants and so forth. And this has to do with this history I'm narrating, which is the Ottoman Empire. So with the rise of the Ottomans right around, 1300, the Crusades, basically, all the Crusaders are expelled by 1300 from the Middle East. The last kingdom to fall is Acre. Okay, so then before you know it, you got the Ottomans now, who rise from the ashes of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, which is conquered, and now they enter into Europe from the eastern door, into the Balkans. They go in, and before you know it, Constantinople, which had been able to withstand Islam for about 800 years, now it's surrounded. Thrace and parts of Greece and Bulgaria, giving them again their modern day names, are totally taken over by Islam. Okay, and now what's interesting to me is, if you look at the writings of a historian today, they'll mention this, and they'll talk about the Ottoman Empire, and they'll talk about the Moors in Spain, and they'll talk about, the Saracens and so forth. But what they won't do is tie it together. And they'll always present it as these are different, disparate groups, and they are from a historical, temporal point of view. But they won't show you the ideology that was common to them all and why they acted the same way. So when you look at the sources of what the Ottomans did, it was exactly what the Arabs were doing over 1,000 years earlier, which is giving people three choices: submit to Islam, be a dhimmi, pay the tax, or die. And that's what they were doing in Eastern Europe. And so Serbia got conquered after the Battle of Kosovo. Hungary, huge parts of Hungary were conquered. Poland was continuously raided. And this sort of thing goes on And actually, let me just interject something real quick, because, the West gets lambasted often about the slave trade, right? Well, few people realize that Muslims, in just these particular last decades or centuries that I'm talking about, just from the 1400s to the 1700s, in 3 centuries, at least 5 million Europeans were enslaved in the name of jihad all around Europe, both especially in the East. I mean, the word Slav is based on slave, because to be a Slav, an Eastern European, was to be a slave of Muslims, because that was their hunting grounds, and including Russia as well, by the way. And so this goes on until 1683. I mean, I started at, the first battle was 636. We're now in 1683, and that's the year that the largest Islamic army of all time ever entered Europe and invaded, and that was the Siege of Vienna. Literally 200,000 or 300,000 Muslims came and surrounded Vienna. And that, I won't get into that. That's a whole long chapter and story. But so now, Vienna actually, and the Polish king came, John Sobieski, and he was able in a war to relieve them. But when you look now, we were talking about, okay, you got countries like Germany and Britain and Norway and Sweden who are very naive, apparently, towards Islam. Then you got these Eastern countries, right? And they're not. And a lot of this, is 100% based on this history, because the public has this living this living memory about what exactly happened to their ancestors and what it means to live with Muslims. And that's why you see this. But of course, here in the West, it's often demonized, the horrible president of Poland, or the horrible president, Viktor Orban of Hungary, and so forth. But when you really look at what they're saying and doing, it's just common sense. It's a Christian people and a Christian identity who are trying to preserve it against those who would actually destroy it and who are openly saying they would. And that's really the reality of it. But here in the West, all that is distorted. And, a lot of it has to do with this history. But I've spoken much now, so I'll stop.
Let's take the contemporary Netherlands. They basically have if you will, an Islamic party there, and the guy basically said, and in no uncertain terms, he said, "Convert or get out." Okay, here you have strangers telling those who have a history of living in their country to get out. That's coming to America. It's already happening in many of America's citizens. It's happening in America's cities, and it's happening on a government level. The appeasement, I believe, is what I call primal surrender to the devil's front, the advance guard, Appeasement is primal surrender to Satan's advance guard. Now, again, and the new, I forget the young man and he's young, who's become, the president of Austria. He's basically having what I would call a historic reality check, and he's saying, we got to stop the immigrants. And again, let me ask you this. As you see Angela Merkel, and you see, obviously Britain has totally, if you will, in my opinion, they've surrendered to Islam. They are an Islamic nation now. Even when you've got the head of their head church, what is it called, Doug?
The Anglican?
The Anglicans. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Embracing Islam, wanting to turn so many of the cathedrals into, and it gets into this too. I forget. You probably know the name of the Muslim mullah that said, "Our women's womb will be the ultimate weapon that we." In essence, repossess the West with. And, do you deal, I have no idea every place you speak, but that's literally being fulfilled. If you will, the white Anglo-Saxon people and whites all over, now they're vilified. And isn't it interesting that the very heart of blonde-haired, blue-eyed women, known for their beauty, known for being blonde and blue-eyed, Scandinavia, they have, I guess what I'm saying, Raymond, everything you just stated in history is not only repeating itself, but for those who seem to like movies and all the different, videos, etc., they basically are watching an instant replay of why the Slavs are called slaves. I didn't know that. Thank you for that. So, I mean, it's beyond insanity. It's demonic reruns.
And that's exactly why, I say, moving forward to the big questions of today, why this is happening is it's all one concerted effort against the kingdom of Christ in the world, in the now. And it's being infiltrated on so many levels. You have the obvious level, you got the beast, or as I call it, as Islam. Then you have the scarlet whore, the one that seduces you, which I might call, secular, atheistic Western civilization. And the two work together in union, and they have one, goal, which is basically the destruction of Christianity. And we see this in so many ways. And when I see a Christian who's like, oh, yeah, I love Islam and blah, 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 and I want to do this, well, that's, it's another reflection of the damage that's been done, but in a different way. And that's why they're working together. It's all one concerted effort in my eyes. There's no other way to understand it, how groups that claim, oh, we don't like Christianity because it's so draconian and patriarchal, and yet, we're ready to, just side up with Islam, which really is draconian and patriarchal. I mean, the only way to understand this riddle is that this is ultimately and fundamentally a war on Christ and Christians, and it's just being done in unison. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, no matter what they believe or what they think. And that's, I think, what we're seeing today. And that's why, for all their faults, when you look at the records of these early European Christians, Orthodox and Catholic, at least they had a sense of identity and a sense of faith that they were able to, risk life and limb. And so many died in these wars just to preserve their heritage. I give them that. So, but today, what do we got? We got people opening their borders and saying, come in and rape us, and, we'll stand by and appease you. I mean, that's downright demonic.
Going to prison. Yeah, Christians going to prison for speaking out against it. Is it? I know there are scholars like yourself that have called for dialogue, but dialogue to a mullah is just basically what I would call subterfuge, because the point is, and at the bottom line, I know that's or the fruit of it, or evil. I'm sorry, the root of it all is that we are in a war, and that war is, in my opinion, this is the end times leading up to the final war, and we're seeing right now, everybody used to say the Holy Roman Empire is, the 10 nations, blah, 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 blah. And I rejected that, 20-some years ago, simply because I don't think people understood the spirit of the day. It doesn't mean that, the apostate Roman Catholic Church is getting a pass. It just means that, I made this statement, and I want to get your feedback on this, is the Pope of Rome, who's supposed to have infallibility, has said more loving and kind things about the Quran, even kissing it, and he belittles Jesus. He belittles a personal relationship with Jesus. He basically said there's no such thing as personal salvation. It's through Rome. And your take on that, in my opinion, okay, if someone was to be, and Doug, here you can chime in, if someone's to be judged on a court of law by evidence presented, this guy basically is making more excuses and praising Islam while denigrating biblical Christianity. Is that your take, Doug?
Perfectly well stated. Well stated.
And Raymond, yours?
You're talking about Francis, right?
I'm talking about the current
Pope Francis. Yeah, Pope Francis. Yep. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've written so much criticizing this particular Pope. And I'm cognizant of your position with the Catholic Church. And my thing is, which is actually an agreement, is, throughout history, you have the layman who many times, whether he's Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, is a good Christian. And then you have the higher ups.
I agree with that, by the way. I agree with that. I'm not
and the higher ups,
that at all.
Yeah, and but I also agree that the higher ups could have very nefarious plans. These popes and so forth. I agree with that as well. This particular pope, the things that he said are just absurd. I mean, when the concept of jihad came up, he said, well, don't forget, Jesus also commissioned the apostles to go and make to preach, and that could be also interpreted as a jihad. So, I mean, he's definitely, trying to whitewash and kowtow and be friends with Islam. And I don't see any call for that at all. So I have, this particular Pope, I think Benedict, I like Benedict, he was honest. He actually, was a little bit critical about Islam. He cited history and so forth. But you got a lot of these guys who are up there in the clergy, in the hierarchy, in the Vatican, who I'm in agreement with are actually involved in some pretty negative stuff. Having said that, of all the denominations, and I know you agree with that, I mean, if it wasn't for Catholics and Orthodox, because of course there were no Protestants until, almost 1600. And if it wasn't for, those people, Islam would have overrun Europe a long time ago. And they were the stalwart
and I want to say
defense.
this too. I know, and I'm going to go on record because everybody thinks I'm a Catholic basher. Couldn't be further from the truth. I believe that laymen, especially, even when the Catholics had the charismatic movement initially, okay, and I was around during the Jesus movement, man, there were people, and typically it was the people. And I believe that when the next great outpouring in the midst of the worst persecution comes, it'll be in the streets, it'll be with the people, because God, God's not impressed with temples built with men's hands. And I'm just saying this, that we're talking about a battle going on for human lives. And this is the thing. The same nation that allowed, 60-70 million little innocent lives to be aborted, and now nothing, you get these fruitcakes, and it isn't even the holidays, running in the Democratic Party. And by the way, I agree with Michael Savage. Liberalism is a mental disorder, okay? I do not even believe it is a human condition apart from supernatural evil influence. Now, that may frost a lot of cakes, but then maybe the cake that has the frosting on it's rotten to begin with. Nobody wants to go and have vanilla frosting on a cake full of maggots. There's another metaphor. But the point is that, what does, and where is the bib? Look, the big mega churches have absolutely surrendered. They won't speak out or only in passing. Neither did the Pope, and I believe the Pope is an entity, okay? I do not believe he is a person. My definition of an entity is when the human spirit has so given over to evil that it no longer rules the body it inhabits. And I'll get a lot of flack for that, but there are some wonderful, wonderful people. And look, there are some snakes in the grass every single movement has its fakes, but does it surprise you as being a historian? Does it surprise you that the response of that which claims to be Christian has been so pathetic, and even speaking up against the innocent slaughter of our brethren worldwide? And can I be blunt? They still will go, and to me it's no different than the Lutheran Church, when the trains were taken, different people, not just Jewish people, but Christians and gypsies and everybody to the camps, and there really were death camps. And now again, you really believe that? Yeah, I believe that. I saw them. So the point is that we're seeing, if you will, a complete abandonment of the faith. And based on the scripture that I see, in the Word of God, that the Christendom is given way to seducing spirits, and the bloodlust, I'll say this, the bloodlust of abortion has led us to where we are now, because just as 60 to 70 million innocent babies were slaughtered, and it's a sacrifice to Satan. Even the Satanists call that. Look at the sacrifice that's taking place, because, and have you heard my word jellyfishianity? Jellyfishianity means that you go with the flow, and if you've ever seen jellyfish, if you're a diver, different currents will take on a different form, and jellyfishianity sure can sting, but it can't do anything more than that. Meanwhile, you have the stalwart drive, ambition, and going forth of a philosophy driven by hell to destroy everybody who is not Muslim. And that's the bottom line. Even Erdogan said that.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I agree with everything you said about this Pope. I'll just compare and contrast him with previous popes, okay? So the Crusades, as I was pointing out, was actually called by Pope Urban II specifically because Muslims were slaughtering Christians, just like they are now. and destroying churches. Okay, that was the reason that men took arms and made great sacrifices, and most of them died just of starvation and dehydration because they marched thousands of miles. Okay, so today the same sort of thing is happening. Churches are being bombed and destroyed, and thousands. I mean, there's genocides of Christians as we speak all around the Islamic world specifically. So what does this Pope do? Well, he writes an encyclical, and instead of even making reference to this, he talks about, the environment and global warming. Okay, so to me, whatever he is, this is not a man who's representing God. This is certainly not of the vicar of Christ. I'm definitely in agreement with that. But moving to this Islam thing and basically looking at history, the past, and the present. And I guess this is why it affects me, or I'm more sensitive to this, because when you really study the past, there's been such a massive shift between how Western people look and understand something like Islam. And a lot of it has to do, I believe, in this basic, infiltration into Christian teaching, which exists. I call it Western Christianity. And it could be Protestant or it could be Catholic, actually, because they both do this. But it's basically this concept where we take half of Christ's words, which is basically to be patient and to forgive, and then we get rid of the other things. Or to put it differently, it's okay if you want to love the sinner, which to me means basically to be forgiving or humanitarian or altruistic. But we've gone one step further now we love, or that is to say, ignore the sin. And Christ never did that. If Christ said turn the other cheek, he also never lost an opportunity to point out that someone was sinning and they needed to repent. And that's the problem right now in the Western church, which is basically, and it's due to this sort of relativism, which we can't even understand that there's something wrong. So not only are we okay in seeing these sins, these errors being committed, but we feel like we have to accept the sin itself. So it's not just, I got to forgive this guy because he doesn't get it. I have to actually allow the sin itself to manifest and to breed, and I can't speak against it. And I'm trying to figure out who in the Bible ever did that, from Christ to the apostles to the prophets and so forth. And that's why we have this, what I call doormat Christianity. It's okay to turn the other cheek on a personal level and forgive your brother, but it's not okay to try to create a social system where we're all passive doormats, and anyone who's not us, who's the other, who's a Muslim, who's exotic, gets to come and wipe their feet, and we can't say anything. That is not Christian. That is not biblical. That's not what Christ came to teach. And that's why, to me, these are all imposter churches, whatever denomination they are, whether they're Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox. Anyone who teaches this half message of Christianity.
Amen.
Right. How do people get your? Hey, Doug? Let me just ask this, Raymond. How do people get your book right now? I mean, they can. Is it in electronic format available immediately, or is it the August date that Doug referred to? Tell people where to go.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. The best way is just you can either type the title, Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West, and just type it in Amazon, and it'll pop up. I think, I'm not sure about the electronic, but I know the hardcover won't go out till August 28th. But if you just order it now before you forget, that's what I would do. That's what I do with books. You'll definitely get it right on August 28th. And, all this stuff that we discussed and so much more is documented. I have over 1,000, I think I have 1,200 footnotes to primary sources. A lot of these sources I translated from Arabic and Greek and Latin because they're not even available. And they just show you the continuity that what you're seeing right now with Islam is 100% based on a non-stop aggressive history of nearly 14 centuries. And the only break in the continuity, it's not from the Muslim world, it's from the West, because the West or Europe or Christendom stood against it and was stalwart for centuries after 2/3 of it was conquered, and they remained. And so the discontinuity is what we're seeing in the present time, which is this sort of appeasement of Islam, this demonic riddle that needs to be figured. But it's all there, and I heartily recommend just go on Amazon, put it in, and it'll be available, and just order it.
And as a matter of fact, I just want to say it'll be available in our program description box on YouTube, BTR, and YouTube and BTR, at least there, if not other places. Both the hardcover edition as well as the Kindle edition both available on August 28th, 352 pages with a foreword by Victor Davis Hanson. So it's a fantastic, by the way, it's a fantastic read. Having a sneak peek, it's so folks, please, understand the military history, understand the history of Islam in the 14 centuries of war between Islam and the West, as it is written by Raymond Ibrahim. We only have Steve. We only have about about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to just turn it back to you, and Steve, you can finish up.
Well, first of all, I consider this critical. I quote all the time von Clausewitz on war, okay? If you look at that, that's huge. I think what Raymond has done in his scholarship and in his trying to get you to understand. Here's the thing. You cannot fight an enemy. I cannot fight an enemy until we understand the enemy. And if you've already surrendered, well, it's a peaceful religion. I've got to let bygones be bygones, or let me say it in my terms. I've got to just let beheaders behead, because, after all, and I just looked up, Ray and Doug, Hebrews 12:4, okay? Ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. That is the pacifistic spirit that has taken over Christianity is anathema. And anathema, for those of you that don't know that means let it be a curse. Cast it aside. It's cast aside. And so the thing is that I understand Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world, or else would his disciples fight. But we're in the last stages, and I want to remind everybody that when you pray and you quote the scripture or the Lord of hosts, and the point is God always gave his people who stood against evil and slaughter, he gave them the victory if they sought his strength. And so I'll go on record as saying right now, if you do not understand what Raymond's book is about, The Sword and the Scimitar, and 1,400 centuries of this, you won't be able to stand against, well, you Christians slaughtered more people. And Raymond, how many people were slaughtered by an estimate by Muslims during 14 centuries?
Let me just give you a quick example about the Crusades. Everyone cries about, when the Crusades conquered Jerusalem in 1099, they invaded it, and there was a bloodbath, and they killed, lots of Muslims and so forth. All right, now let's move back about 20 years before that. That was happening on a daily basis at the hands of Muslims. Okay, for 20 years, there was a constant bloodbath. Now, you'll never hear that. It's always presented in a vacuum. You don't know that Seljuk Muslim Turks, in the name of jihad, killed literally hundreds of thousands of Christians and enslaved more in just 20 years. You'll only hear that Christians went in at 1099, conquered Jerusalem, and killed some thousands. Okay, but if you want to look at how many people have died in the name of jihad, it is literally in the hundreds of millions over the 14 centuries.
Hundreds of millions. That makes Stalin. That makes, Hitler. That makes all the great tyrants. I mean, Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan. I mean, that makes those guys look like pikers when it comes to murder. And I know those are historic figures, but you see, can I say something? Who was it, Doug, that made the statement? 1,000 lives lost or 100 lives lost is a tragedy. I think it was Zbigniew Brzezinski, or Kissinger, and 1 million lives is a statistic. That's really a true statement. People cannot grasp those simple words, can they, Raymond?
No, they can't. I mean, look, earlier I mentioned you got 50 countries where Christians are being persecuted, and 40 of them are a Muslim majority. Okay, let's just look at one of them, Nigeria. In just the last 6 months, 6,000 Christians were butchered, okay, and maybe massacred, beheaded, raped before they were butchered, burned alive, whatever, since the beginning of the year. So basically, on average, 1,000 Christians every month are being killed in the name of jihad in just one country. Now, Nigeria isn't even ranked, I don't think, in the top 10 worst countries. So imagine the top 10 worst countries, what's going on there. And yet, who hears about that? Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? And see, that's the bottom line. Who cares? Yep. And Jesus cares, and the same thing. I guess what I'm trying to say, is blood guiltiness in that which I call them Christian claimants, blood guiltiness is going to be something that all of the Christians must stand for. Now, stand before God and give account for. Because, and here's the other thing, it's just like this. It's like abandoning children to a secular education system, and now secular education is teaching Islam. Isn't it funny? God, get out, throw away the Ten Commandments, and don't ever speak the name of Jesus. There's no name that terrifies evil more than the name of Jesus. So it's the Christians. The Christians are the ones that are rejecting the very Lord that saved them, in my opinion, by their denial. And they're trying to be politically correct, and they're cowardly cowards. Yeah,
and it's sad to point out that it's because they're not Christians. You see, because the greatest weapon... Yeah, the greatest weapon that Satan has isn't a foreign entity. It's to infiltrate the church and to let so many millions of people think they're Christians, and they're actually actively helping Satan's kingdom.
Gosh, do Steve and I know that? I didn't mean to punch in there like that, but you are so right. It's the wolf inside the the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah, it's worse than all the other things, and it's what I mean. Real quick, this Islam thing. If you had rational people with common sense and Christian mores, would be over like that, okay? Because the Islamic world is fundamentally militarily, economically weak. It wouldn't even be a problem. The reason it's a problem is because these Western elements are empowering it and bringing it in and covering for it and spreading it. That's why it's a problem. And that's what tells you the problem isn't Islam by itself. It's this other element, which is, a lot near